Imagine being born into gold-laced cradles, your bloodline stretching back centuries through marble halls and gilded thrones, your first breath drawn in chambers where kings were made, your tiny fingers destined to wear rings of unimaginable power. And yet within hours of your arrival, whispers begin, not of celebration, but of shame. Your very existence becomes a secret too dangerous to speak. In the grand palaces of history, perfection wasn't just expected, it was demanded by divine right itself. And when a royal child came into the world with gentle eyes that slanted upward, with features that defied the carved marble perfection of their ancestors, those whispers turned to deadly silence. That child vanished, not into fairy tales or distant lands, but into darkness behind locked doors, false death certificates, hidden faces, forgotten names. This wasn't just royal scandal, this was emotional murder. Today we descend into the shadows where children born with Down syndrome, into the most powerful bloodlines on earth, were buried alive in shame. You know the names of their kings and queens, but these names, these stories, were never meant to survive. Royal blood was sacred, meant to flow pure and unbroken through generations, a divine river connecting earthly power to heavenly mandate. In an age before science could explain the mystery of chromosomes, before understanding could illuminate the beauty of difference, disability was not just feared, it was seen as proof of God's displeasure. Children born with what we now know as Down syndrome carried faces that told a different story than the one carved in royal portraits. Their slower development, their distinctive features, their gentle temperaments, all seen as dangerous imperfections that could shatter the illusion of divine perfection that kept thrones secure. Across centuries of European power, from the blood-soaked courts of medieval England to the Habsburg dynasties, from the grand Windsor estates to the militaristic Prussian palaces, these children were systematically erased. Some institutionalized in places that resembled prisons more than homes, some declared dead while their hearts still beat, and some simply vanished as if they had never drawn breath at all. But history has cracks in its perfect facade. And through those cracks, even after centuries of silence, the truth still breathes. Tonight we give voice to the voiceless, we remember the forgotten, we speak the names that were meant to die with their owners. In the shadow-drenched corridors of medieval power, where torchlight flickered against stone walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets, the concept of divine right ruled with iron certainty. Kings didn't simply govern by force, they ruled because God had chosen their bloodline, marked it as sacred, blessed it with the authority to command millions. Every royal birth was therefore a religious event, a continuation of heaven's will made flesh. But what happened when heaven seemed to deliver something unexpected? Picture the moment, a royal chamber thick with incense and tension, midwives whose lives depended on delivering good news, and then, silence. Not the triumphant cries announcing a perfect heir, but the heavy, suffocating quiet that follows when reality refuses to match expectation. The child's features, beautiful in their own way, but different from the sharp-angled perfection carved into cathedral stones and painted in royal portraits, became an immediate crisis of faith. Medieval minds, lacking our modern understanding of genetics, turned to darker explanations. Was this child punishment for royal sins? A sign that God had withdrawn his blessing from the bloodline? Or worse, evidence that the royal blood itself had been corrupted, tainted, rendered unfit to rule? In courts where legitimacy could be questioned over far less, where rivals waited in shadows for any sign of weakness, such children represented existential threats to entire dynasties. The solutions were as varied as they were cruel. In some castle towers, infants would simply disappear, birth records would be altered, witnesses would fall silent, and midwives would speak of tragic deaths that occurred conveniently out of sight. Monastery walls became convenient hiding places, children declared called to God's service before they could even walk, locked away where their existence couldn't threaten the carefully constructed image of royal perfection. But perhaps most chilling was the emotional mathematics of it all. These weren't monsters making these decisions, they were parents, driven by a toxic combination of genuine fear and political necessity. Imagine the royal mother, holding her child with love and terror warring in her heart, knowing that acknowledging this love publicly could destroy everything her family had built. Picture the king, torn between paternal instinct and the cold calculation that his dynasty's survival might depend on making his own child disappear. In the shadowed alcoves of history, we find traces of these lost lives, mysterious infant deaths recorded immediately after births that were initially celebrated, sudden journeys by royal children to distant relatives from which they never returned, vague references in court documents to children who were there one day and simply gone the next. their names scratched from family trees as if they had never existed. What did those children see in their brief hidden lives? Sunlight filtered through barred windows, faces of servants instructed never to speak their names. Did they wonder why their siblings played in golden halls while they remained in chambers where laughter never echoed? The Age of Enlightenment was supposed to bring reason, understanding, compassion to replace medieval superstition. But the Age of Enlightenment didn't bring compassion to royal chambers. It brought more clever ways to erase the undesired. The year was 1919, and the world had just watched empires crumble in the blood-soaked mud of the Great War. Royal houses across Europe lay in ruins, their divine authority shattered by machine guns and poison gas. For those monarchies that survived, like Britain's House of Windsor, maintaining public respect wasn't just about tradition, it was about survival itself. Into this fragile world came two children, whose existence would become one of the most shameful chapters in modern royal history: Nerissa and Katherine Bowes-Lyon, first cousins to the future Queen Elizabeth II. Born with Down syndrome into a family where image was everything, their fate was sealed not by medieval superstition, but by cold, calculated public relations. Their mother, Fenella Bowes-Lyon, faced an impossible choice. The royal family had already weathered scandals, the abdication crisis, whispers about Nazi sympathies, questions about their German heritage during wartime. Two disabled children in the family tree represented yet another potential source of public embarrassment in an era when disability was still viewed through the harsh lens of eugenics and social Darwinism. The solution was as modern as it was medieval: institutional disappearance. In 1941, when Nerissa was 22 and Katherine was 15, they were quietly transferred to the Royal Earlswood Hospital for mental defectives in Surrey. The very name of the institution tells you everything about how society viewed children like them. This wasn't a hospital in any meaningful sense. It was a warehouse for human beings that society had deemed inconvenient. But here's where the cruelty becomes almost incomprehensible. The royal family didn't just abandon these children, they erased them. In the official Burke's Peerage, the definitive guide to British aristocracy, Nerissa and Katherine were listed as having died in 1940 and 1961 respectively. Dead, while they lived and breathed and wondered why their royal cousins never visited. Picture their daily existence: institutional walls painted in the soul-crushing colors of bureaucratic indifference, days measured not by royal ceremonies or family celebrations, but by mealtimes and medication schedules. While their cousin Elizabeth learned statecraft and prepared for coronation, Nerissa and Katherine learned to navigate the casual cruelties of understaffed institutions where their royal blood meant nothing. They had birthdays that nobody remembered. They watched television broadcasts of royal weddings, perhaps recognizing faces they had once known as children, never understanding why those faces never appeared in their visiting rooms. They lived in a world where Christmas came and went without family, where their own deaths had been announced while they still had decades of life ahead of them. The truly devastating detail: when Nerissa actually died in 1986, she was buried in a pauper's grave marked only with a plastic tag bearing her name and a number. No royal crest, no family ceremony, no acknowledgement that the blood running through her veins was the same that flowed through the woman crowned Queen of England. The secret only cracked open in 1987, when a documentary filmmaker discovered the truth. The public outrage was swift and brutal. How could the royal family, who preached about duty and service, abandon their own family members? How could they lie about their deaths while accepting public money and respect? But even beyond Britain's palace gates, even beyond the carefully manicured gardens of Windsor, the same script was playing out in royal houses across Europe. The crown's shame knew no borders. As the British royal family was perfecting the art of institutional erasure, across Europe other royal bloodlines were wrestling with the same impossible equation. How do you balance family love with public image when the world sees disability as weakness? Princess Alexandrine of Prussia represented a different choice entirely. Born in 1915 to Prince August Wilhelm, son of Kaiser Wilhelm II, she carried both Down syndrome and one of the most prestigious bloodlines in Germanic history. But unlike her British counterparts, Alexandrine's family made a radical decision. They kept her home. Picture the contrast. While Nerissa and Katherine were learning to navigate institutional corridors, Princess Alexandrine was growing up in actual palace halls, participating in family meals, joining holiday celebrations, experiencing something resembling normal family life. Her relatives spoke to her with affection, included her in photographs, treated her as a cherished member of the family rather than a shameful secret. But, and here's where the story becomes complex, this inclusion had strict boundaries. Alexandrine was loved privately and hidden publicly. She appeared in family photographs that were never released to the press. She attended private gatherings but was carefully absent from any official functions. The Prussian royal family had found a middle path between outright abandonment and full acceptance, private love, public invisibility. Hundreds of miles away in France, a similar drama was unfolding in the household of Charles de Gaulle, the towering military leader who would become France's most influential president. His daughter Anne was born with Down syndrome in 1928, and her story reveals both the best and the limitations of parental love in an unforgiving world. De Gaulle, a man whose life was defined by public duty and national service, approached his daughter's disability with characteristic directness. He refused to hide her, refused to institutionalize her, refused to pretend she didn't exist. Anne lived at home, was openly discussed as a beloved family member, and received her father's complete devotion. When asked about his greatest accomplishment, de Gaulle would often mention Anne before listing his military victories or political achievements. But even this powerful man, who could reshape nations and command armies, couldn't protect his daughter from the broader world's cruelty. Anne was educated privately, socialized within carefully controlled circles, kept from the public eye not out of shame but out of protective love. De Gaulle understood that French society wasn't ready to accept a disabled child as part of their great leader's legacy. When Anne died at age 20 in 19, he established a hospital in her name, spoke openly about his loss, and honored her memory in ways that the British royal family never did for their abandoned cousins. Yet even in his love, even in his public mourning, there remained the underlying reality. Anne had been cherished but hidden, loved but never truly integrated into the public aspects of her father's extraordinary life. These contrasting stories raise haunting questions about the nature of protection versus acceptance. Was secrecy better than abandonment? Was private love sufficient when it came with public denial? Was the Prussian and French approach more humane than the British institutional solution, or simply a more palatable form of the same underlying shame? Both families faced the same crushing pressure. In a world that viewed disability as personal failure, how do you love a child who represents everything society has taught you to fear? How do you balance genuine affection with genuine terror of public judgment? But what of the others? Those whose names we'll never know, whose stories were buried so deep that even whispered rumors never escaped, who slipped through time like ghosts in velvet, leaving behind only the faintest traces in documents that nobody was ever meant to read. In the deepest archives of European royal history, where dust settles on documents that were never meant to see daylight, researchers sometimes stumble upon curious gaps. Birth records that begin enthusiastically and then stop abruptly, family trees with branches that seem to have been deliberately pruned, burial registries with entries that don't quite match the official narratives. These gaps tell a story more chilling than any specific account of abandonment or institutional cruelty. They suggest a systematic pattern of erasure that went far beyond individual family shame. This was coordinated disappearance on a scale that suggests royal houses across Europe had developed unofficial protocols for dealing with the problem of disabled children. Consider the mathematical impossibility. Given the frequency of Down syndrome births in the general population, approximately 1 in every 700 children, and given the extensive records kept by royal families over centuries, we should find numerous documented cases of disabled royal children. Instead, we find almost nothing. The statistical silence is deafening. What we do find are shadows, hastily revised genealogies, sudden gaps in family correspondence, mysterious references to children who were called to God's service before they could speak. We find burial grounds attached to royal properties where simple graves hold bodies of infants and children with no official records of their lives. We find financial records showing regular payments to religious institutions for special care of unnamed individuals. Perhaps most disturbing, we find evidence of medieval and Renaissance practices that may have involved more direct solutions. Historical accounts speak of infants born with marks of God's displeasure, who suffered convenient accidents shortly after birth. Court physicians who specialized in declaring newborns too weak to survive, midwives who were rewarded for their discretion regarding difficult births. The machinery of erasure was sophisticated and thorough. Royal households maintained what were essentially parallel record systems, official genealogies for public consumption, and private documents that told more complete stories. Children who lived for years could be retroactively declared to have died in infancy. Entire lives could be compressed into single lines of text or eliminated entirely through careful editing of family histories. But technology also preserved what human intention tried to destroy. Archaeological evidence from royal burial grounds sometimes contradicts official records. skeletal remains showing characteristics consistent with Down syndrome found in graves that supposedly held only normal children. DNA analysis of remains revealing genetic markers that match known royal lineages but were never acknowledged in life. The emotional toll of this systematic erasure extends beyond the children themselves to the parents who made these impossible choices. Imagine the psychological weight carried by royal mothers who held their disabled children in secret, who lived with the daily knowledge that they had chosen political survival over parental honesty. Picture the fathers who built empires and commanded armies but couldn't protect their most vulnerable children from their own institutions. In some cases, we can trace the generational trauma. Royal family members who later became advocates for disability rights, as if trying to atone for ancestral sins they couldn't publicly acknowledge. Charitable foundations established with suspiciously specific missions to help disabled children. Anonymous donations to institutions serving populations that official royal genealogies insisted their families had never touched. The modern world likes to imagine we've moved beyond such cruelties, but the mechanisms of erasure haven't disappeared. They've simply become more subtle. Even today, public figures face intense pressure to present perfect families. Even today, disability is often viewed as a private tragedy rather than a public diversity to be celebrated. What haunts the imagination isn't just what we know about these lost children, but what we'll never know. What were their personalities? Did they have favorite toys, preferred foods, particular ways of laughing? Did they dream of lives beyond the walls that contained them? Did they wonder why their royal heritage seemed to mean so much to everyone except when it came to their own dignity? And in every silent corner of every gilded palace, in every archive where pages have been carefully removed, in every family tree where branches have been severed, the echoes of forgotten children still cry out for recognition. Tonight we've spoken names that were meant to die in institutional silence. Nerissa and Katherine Bowes-Lyon, who lived as royal ghosts in the shadows of their cousin's crown. Princess Alexandrine of Prussia, who knew family love but never public acknowledgement. Anne de Gaulle, cherished by her father but hidden from his nation. And countless others whose names were stolen along with their dignity, whose stories were buried beneath centuries of royal shame. Let this be said clearly and without qualification. They were not accidents of breeding. They were not divine punishment for royal sins. They were not embarrassments to be managed or problems to be solved. They were children. Human beings with the same capacity for joy, love, and belonging as any crowned head who ever sat upon a throne. The progress we see today, the public advocacy, the inclusion movements, the celebration of neurodiversity, stands on the graves of children who were denied these basic recognitions. Every Special Olympics athlete who receives a medal does so in memory of royal children who were never allowed to compete. Every person with Down syndrome who lives independently, loves freely, and contributes to society does so as a testament to the potential that was systematically wasted for centuries. But we must remember that progress is fragile, that acceptance can retreat as quickly as it advances. The same social pressures that drove royal families to hide their disabled children still exist in subtler forms. The same preference for genetic perfection that marked certain bloodlines as unworthy still whispers in modern conversations about prenatal testing and designer babies. History's lesson isn't just about royal cruelty. It's about the human tendency to define worth through narrow lenses of acceptability. Every child deserves to be loved openly, remembered proudly, and seen fully for who they are, rather than hidden for what they represent. Even if history tried to forget them, we remember. Even if their families denied them, we claim them. Even if their era rejected them, ours embraces them. In the end, the greatest tragedy isn't that these children were born different, it's that the world around them was too small, too frightened, and too cruel to see the beauty in that difference. They deserved better than the silence they received. They deserved the recognition we give them now.